Hi everybody, I'm Tony from the Five Bells Computer Club. Whilst we were running our sessions on Zoom, Richard Philpott gave us a very informative session about passwords, and here is the recording of that session. I apologise for the poor quality of the recording, but I think you'll find the information very useful.
Okay, first thing to say is I'm going to keep this very short and simple. There's a lot of things you can say about passwords, but most of them aren't very relevant to people like us, to be honest. There's a lot of stuff written about passwords which is really aimed at what I might call corporate users, so people sitting in offices on office systems, and a lot of what's written about passwords is not very relevant to people at home using passwords for their email and for websites and shopping on websites and things like that. Basically, it's in three parts, this talk, very short parts. So the first part is I'm going to talk about how passwords are stolen, if you like, how people get hold of your passwords, because clearly knowing how they get hold of them makes a difference to what you do to protect them. So I'll then talk about what that implies for protecting those passwords. Now that's pretty short, so I'm going to do a quick overview of two other things which are connected with how you protect your passwords. One is using a password manager, and the other is something called two-factor authentication. Now, I think both of those topics could potentially turn into longer sessions in their own right. All I'm going to do today is give a very brief introduction to them so that you know what they are, what they can do for you, but without going into too much detail about how you would actually use them in practice. I think that's the subject either for, as I say, either a different session or one-to-one sessions with people if people actually want to try it and then need some help doing so. Right, so I'll just share my screen. Basically, the stereotypical view people have of passwords being stolen is probably a hacker sitting at a PC trying to type in your password, trying to guess what your password is and typing it in. Basically, that's virtually never going to happen. In practice, there are three main ways, I think, that people like us have our passwords compromised. One is a so-called phishing attack. That could be someone ringing you up and pretending to be from an organization that you are a member of or a customer of, like your internet provider or a bank or something. Or it could be an email with a link in it that takes you to a website that looks like a website that belongs to your bank or internet provider or whatever. So you type in your user ID and password without realizing that it isn't actually their site, in which case they get hold of it. That's phishing. There's also something called social engineering, which is quite closely related, where someone will actually talk to you, or could be an email conversation, but more likely talk to you on the phone, sort of win your confidence and again trick you into just telling them what your password is. The second way it can be done is a keylogger, which is a virus program which can be installed on your computer either because you've clicked on a dodgy link in an email or an SMS message or in another website, which then installs a virus program on your computer, which runs in the background, records the passwords as you type them in, and then sends them off to someone via the internet. And then the third main way is what's called a security breach at a website. So if you're a customer or a member of an organization, they'll have your information on a big database on a central computer somewhere. If a hacker manages to break into that through some back door, and there are lots of ways it could be done, but they're all quite complicated. But if that happens, then they potentially have on their computer a copy of all the users that company has. And that will potentially include their email addresses and what's called a hash of their passwords. So they won't have the password in a form that they can just read and use, but the password will be encrypted in a way that if they can guess the password, they can try it and see if it matches that encrypted data. So what they can do is run programs which run very, very quickly through all the passwords on that database and try to find matches for them. And most of them, they won't be able to find matches, but a few of them they will, and that will give them information about the passwords. So I can talk more in detail about that happens if people want to later, but it doesn't, I don't think it's very important. What you need to know is that they have programs that can run through these encrypted passwords and potentially find them. So what does this mean for the passwords that we use? Well, firstly, in terms of phishing, it doesn't really make much difference to what type of password you've got, because no matter how strong your password is, if you've told it to somebody, whether intentionally or unintentionally, then they've got it. The two defenses against that: one is have a virus program that will catch it. Most virus programs will identify these things. The second defense is what's called two-factor authentication, where you put in some other information other than the password. And I'll talk about that a bit later. All right, now the security breach of a website, the problem the hackers have is that the only way they can find out whether a particular password is right or not is by encrypting it and see if it matches the encryption in the database. And that takes time. And that's the key to this. What we're trying to do by having a good password is enormously increase the length of time that it takes to guess the password, bearing in mind that they're likely to be trying to crack thousands or hundreds of thousands of passwords at the same time. So anything that mops up, uses their computing resources and makes it harder for them to find them is a good thing. And that's why these are the standard rules, and you often see that websites will enforce these rules anyway when you create a password. The single most important one is how long it is. An 8-character password is hundreds of thousands of times more harder to guess than a 3 or 4-character password, no matter what the characters are. Even if it was something really obvious, if it's 8 characters long, it's going to be much harder to guess than a 3-character password. Secondly, if you add a mixture of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters, again, you enormously increase the number of possibilities that the hacker has to try. I don't want to go into a detailed explanation of this, but if you just think for a moment, if you only use lowercase letters, then there are 26 possibilities for every character in your password. If you add uppercase letters as well, there are now 52 possibilities. So that means that a 1-letter password, a bit unlikely, but a 1-letter password, you've got 26 possibilities if it's lowercase only, 52 if it's uppercase only. But if you then make that a 2-letter password, you've got 26 times 26 if it's lowercase only, but 52 times 52 if you've uppercase only. And you don't need to know much mathematics to see that the number of possibilities goes up at an absolutely phenomenal rate as you add more possibilities for each character. And then when they're trying out passwords, they will also use obvious ones like names, proper names, dates, obvious keyboard sequences like QWERTY, and any words that can be found in a dictionary. And they could be foreign dictionaries as well as English dictionaries. Hence these standard rules for password: 8 characters or more, a mixture of different types of characters, and avoiding keyboard sequences and dictionary words and so on. If you follow all those rules, the chances of them actually hitting upon your password when they're running one of these mass attacks on a stolen database are very small. The second defense against it is using two-factor authentication again, which, as I say, I'll talk about later. The final defense against it is to use different passwords for different sites. Now, the word for it, the counsel of perfection, if you like, the perfect solution would be to use a completely different password for every site you use. In reality, the only way you can do that is by having a password manager of some sort to keep track of them all. If you're not doing that, then the best compromise is to use, if you're going to reuse the passwords, to reuse them on sites that don't matter so much, Like, if it's just a site where you just go and browse things, it hasn't got any credit card information, for example, and that sort of thing, certainly not banks, of course, then it doesn't matter too much if you're reusing them. The problem with reusing them is that if the hacker gets hold of your password from one site and you've reused the password, they know that they can then get into other sites as well using that same password potentially, because they'll probably have your email from the same data. Which brings me to what I call the golden rule. And this is the one thing that I always emphasize when I'm talking to people about passwords. However much you reuse your passwords, and however weak those passwords are, for your email account, use a strong password, i.e. one that follows these rules, and a password that you don't use anywhere else. Because if you use the same password for other sites and one of those other sites gets hacked and someone gets hold of your password from there, then immediately they also have access to your email. And once they have access to your email, they can often use the email to reset your password on those other sites, so they can then get access to all sorts of other things. You really don't want to lose control of your email. So the golden rule is, however careless you are, however much you think it doesn't matter on other sites, have a strong and a unique password for your email account. That's really, I think, in terms of actually creating passwords, that's all I really think is worth saying. I mean, there are all sorts of tricks people use, and lots of people have their own tricks, ways of making the passwords different for different sites. And there are techniques like, if you actually need a password that you can remember, then there are techniques like coming up with an easily remembered sentence, like, I travelled to Oxford the day before yesterday. And then if you just write that down, and you need to write it down once, get the first letter of each character and use those as your password, then that's a pretty strong password, as long as it's at least 8 characters long. It appears completely random, but as long as you can remember the sentence, you've got a memorable password. So that's just one example of a trick, and there are lots of techniques like that. But the important thing is to follow these basic rules. Having said that, you want to store these passwords somewhere. And if you do want to have a completely separate password for each site, or even if you've just got several different passwords and you find it difficult to remember them, then the question is, what do you do with them? One option is to use a password manager. Now, the simplest password manager, and which is perfectly adequate for most people in our sort of situation, is a notebook. There's absolutely nothing wrong with writing down your passwords. I mean, if you're traveling around and carrying the notebook and your PC together while you're traveling around, probably not a good idea. But if you're just using your PC at home, then there's absolutely no problem with having the passwords written down. Realistically, someone is not going to break into your house and search your house for paper with passwords on. That's just not how things get cracked nowadays. So don't feel you shouldn't write it down. I mean, you'll often see password guidance say don't write the password down. That really applies to sort of office type scenarios where people write the password on a post-it note and stick it under the keyboard, or even worse, on the monitor itself on the screen. But and where it could be found by other people in the office. But those of us who are at home aren't really in that position, so feel free to write them down. A more convenient option, particularly if you're traveling around a lot, is to use a password manager app. Now, so I'm just going to give a very short demo of Lastpass, which is a good example of these password managers, just to give you an idea of how they work. I wouldn't really expect people to be able to follow it all necessarily and do it straight away, but we can always have either a more detailed session later specifically on that, or we can have one-to-one sessions if people try it and want more help. Right, so you should now be able to see my browser window. So this is Chrome, but they're available for all browsers. So this is the extension. I won't use that one. I'll go back a step. I'll create a new account. So Now, the important thing if you use the last one, if you use a password manager, is that this one password protects all your other passwords. So this password needs to be very strong, probably stronger than the one I'm using here, but to just make it easy for the demo. So we'd certainly never use a password with the word password in it, but right. So and there's a lot of information in there. Let's close this down. I would do a demo myself rather than using the demo they show there. So let's assume I now wanted to set up an account on the BBC. So BBC account. Okay, register a new user. Yes, I am over 13. Yes. Now you'll see that the BBC are saying this is the sort of things I was talking about in the rules. 8 or more characters, at least one letter, and at least one number or symbol. So I can either make up a password that fits that, or because I'm using this Lastpass program now, I can click on here, and it will generate me a password, which doesn't actually meet the rules at the moment because it doesn't include a symbol. But if I tick that, it will. So now I have this totally non-memorable password. But if I click fill password, it will do two things. It will fill it in for me, and it will offer to add it to LastPass. So if I click add to LastPass, and then I just need to answer these other questions. Right, so I'm logged in, and it's now passed in save. So if I now log out, you can see what happens the next time I come in. Oh, it's over there. Sorry. Right. Okay. So if I wanted to sign in again now LastPass has recognized that this is a site that it's stored the password for. So it's got this little symbol here. Click on this, fill, and it's filled in the username and the password. The fact that it's a long and complicated password doesn't matter because I never actually have to see it because LastPass does it all for me. And there we are. There are other password managers. They all work in broadly similar ways. I think LastPass is probably the most user-friendly, but unfortunately, there is a small problem with it recently that they've changed their rules. The free version used to be perfectly good for everything that any of us would want to use, but they've recently changed the rules so you can use it on a PC, on any number of PCs, or you can use it on any number of phones, tablets, or iPhones or iPads, but you can't use it on both PCs and phones or tablets unless you pay for it, which is a bit of a there's been you can imagine there's been a lot of discontent about that. So some people are moving away to other password managers. There's one called Bitwarden, there's one called Dashlane, and so on. They all have their pros and cons. But I think from the point of view of demonstrating what the password manager does, I think that's adequate. Oh yes, there's two things I should mention. Firstly, you can go into what's called the vault, and you can see all the passwords that have been saved, and delete them and do various things with them, of course. You can also, if you go into a site that you haven't previously saved the password for, not when you're registering for the first time, but a site that you're already a member of, you just want to save the password, then again, it will prompt you to save it. So you set the thing up once, and then each time you go into a site, it will save the password for you. So you gradually accumulate all the passwords you've set up over the year, months or years. You know, you don't have to go in and put them all in at the same time. And that, I think, is pretty much all I want to say about that. I was going to have a talk about two-factor authentication as well, but maybe we'll leave that to another time, Tony.
I think it might be worth just mentioning what it is, because people have heard what it is, but they're not sure what it means. So just in brief.
Yeah, okay. So yes, okay. So what it is so to just briefly demonstrate using the Google Authenticator. I will demonstrate it using the Lastpass site, but the principle is the same on any site that you might choose to use it on, like Gmail or Hotmail or anything else. So go to the Lastpass site as usual, click login, put in my email address and password as usual. Click login, and the Authenticator app is showing me a 6-digit number. Now, all I have to do is type it in. Now, you can choose to trust the computer for 30 days, which just means that you won't have to type it in again for the next 30 days on this computer. If anyone else tries to get into your account from any other device, they would still need the code. So I type the code in. Authenticate. And I'm in. And the important thing about the code is that, or one important thing about the code is that it changes every 30 seconds. So even if someone gets hold of it by looking over my shoulder or putting a keylogger on my computer or by any other means, it won't be of any use to them, because 30 seconds later it's gone and it will have changed, and the code they've got will be completely useless. So that's it in terms of actually using the authenticator. The way it works is basically you put an app on your phone, which now unfortunately I can't share the screen on my Android phone. This is a sort of a fake screenshot, if you like. Right, okay, hopefully you can see that. So when you set up something called two-factor authentication, and there are lots of sites that let you do this. Certainly both Gmail and Microsoft email, so Outlook and Hotmail, you can do it for. You can do it for PayPal, you can do it for Facebook, you can do it for Lastpass, which is of course very useful because you really want to keep that Lastpass secure if you've got all your other passwords in there. The app, when it runs on your phone, you just open the app and it generates a 6-digit number for each of these accounts, which changes every 30 seconds. When you log into the site, it will prompt you, and actually I can demonstrate that. If I just log out of this password account, sorry, Lastpass account, and then I log into one that I set up earlier with two-factor authentication on.
I think what we'll do is set up a breakout room later if anybody does want to go into more detail about this.
Yeah,
but I think just the essentials of two-factor authentication is the site that you're trying to enter needs a second way of proving that it's you. So just your password isn't enough.
Right.
And it's worth doing it for bank accounts and things like that, but probably it's too complicated for the majority of us, I think.
Yeah.
You've got your hand.
Tony, I think with bank accounts, it's now almost compulsory.
I agree.
But the way that they do it is they send a text to your mobile phone. And then the thing that you really have to worry about is that somebody hijacks your mobile phone number. and transfers it to their handset, and then they get the code to your number, but it's actually onto their phone. And that's the one danger with two-factor authentication, which uses your mobile phone number. You have to be very careful that no one hijacks your mobile phone number.
The big advantage of something using something like the Google Authenticator app, which I was trying to demonstrate there, not very successfully, is that the number is only ever generated on the physical phone. So even if someone manages to hijack your SIM, they manage to get a new SIM card with your number on, they still won't be able to generate those numbers. They would need to be physically in possession of your phone in order to do it, and be able to unlock your phone in order to get those numbers. But the banks probably think it's too technically complicated for most of their customers to use that approach.
I mean, not all banks use the mobile phone approach. Some give you a little electronic
separate token, yes,
which generates numbers.
I've got one of them here.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Is that for Barclays or?
That one's for Lloyd's. That one is. Thank you. Okay, Richard, is there anything else you wish to add, or do you think that's a good?
No, apart from questions, I think that's
okay.
that was the
Thank
summary I
you.
wanted to cover.
Thank you very much.